Envy, dedicated to Julia in Romania. Hello, this is Jana. I'm here with the first of a two-part story set on the Greek island of Crete. It's a special story for Bertie and me. We actually wrote it on location. It's also a follow-up to a story I wrote some time ago called Fear, and it features Emily, who is struggling with a phobia, and her best friend Heidi. As you will hear in this story, their friendship comes under some strain during a school trip. And I'm delighted to send our best wishes to Julia in Romania and her mum Alexandria, who have very generously supported Story Nori on more than one occasion. We really hope that you enjoy this story. Emily was in a state of awe as the aeroplane's engines revved up, ready to get spinning along the runway. For her, the idea of being suspended 35,000 feet in the air by some miraculous aeronautical magic was a huge thrill. She and her best friend Heidi hardly slept a wink the night before, counting the hours for this moment as they'd huddled up in Heidi's attic bedroom, giggling excitedly. But as it turned out, it wasn't so thrilling for Heidi. She gripped Emily's hand. In fact, she was firmly glued to it. Fortunately, Emily, being in such high spirits, hardly noticed her hand turning blue. "Oh my goodness! What a buzz!" Emily shrieked excitedly as the plane sped up into the air. "Look how high up we are! Heidi, look!" she gushed. You might think she was being tactless, but in truth, her excitement helped dispel her best friend's fear of flying. Heidi breathed a sigh of relief. "Oh, what would I do without Emily, my bright spark?" she quietly thought to herself. Emily was sitting beside her by a mixture of luck and the power of persuasion. They were going on a school trip to the island of Crete, but it was really only meant for the handful of students who were studying ancient Greek. After 2 terms, a boy called Charlie could not stand any more Greek declensions, and so he switched to Spanish. There was a spare place on the Cretan expedition, and Emily, who was in the French class, begged and begged Mr. Christakis to allow her to join the trip, telling him that she loved mythology, even if she didn't learn ancient Greek. Of course, she doubly wanted to go to be with her best mate Heidi. Mr. Christakis, who had a soft heart, relented. When the takeoff was over and the plane was flying high above the clouds, the passengers settled into their seats. Heidi opened a copy of Homer's Iliad on the first page. The ancient epic poem of the Trojan War was far in advance of what the class was learning, but she was determined to puzzle it out with the help of her Homeric dictionary. Meanwhile, Emily was reading an exciting novel featuring the Greek gods who were hanging around in the modern world, still carrying on ancient grudges and fighting secret supernatural battles. After 3.5 hours of flying, they touched down with raucous applause at Hania Airport on the island of Crete. The terminal was far less hassle than London's Gatwick had been, and soon the exuberant children were travelling in a minibus, driving past the majestic Aegean Sea. After about 40 minutes, they turned off the highway and headed into the foothills of the mountains. They drove through winding valleys and past sparkling lakes, taking pictures on their mobile phones. They were quietly in awe of the beautiful scene around them. They passed rows and rows of olive trees and as many shades of green as they'd ever seen sprouting out of grey and orange mountainsides. Every so often, modernity intruded amid the ancient landscape with giant solar panels or wind turbines perched on peaks. But nothing could manage to be ugly here. It was all bathed in crystal clear sunlight that made everything cheerful. Even concrete houses that were only half built, or stone cottages that had half tumbled down. The airline had only served tasteless food at rip-off prices, and so of course the kids were ravenous. They were delighted when the minibus pulled up outside a row of tavernas. They looked appealing as they were situated alongside some antique fountains that bubbled with mountain spring water. An appetizing, rich, smoky smell of burnt olive wood and roast meat scented the air because the food was cooked over a fire on the terrace. Heidi realized that this was the same smell that the heroes of Homer's Iliad experienced when they offered sacrificial animals to the gods. They settled down at a restaurant called Carpe Diem and sat outside under the cool plane trees, their wide leaves providing shade. The menu was written in Greek, German and English. Heidi tried to decipher the Greek letters, which were the same as in ancient Greek. She worked out some words like spanakopita, souvlaki, tzatziki, but she had no idea what any of them meant, because the words in the Greek language have changed quite a bit over the past 2,000 years. In fact, all her hours of studying ancient Greek were hardly any help at all when it came to the language that Greeks speak today. When it came to being a tourist in Greece, she might as well have been learning ancient Aztec. The owner of the restaurant, a friendly but businesslike lady, came round to take the orders. Heidi was amazed when Emily piped up, "Kalimera," which means hello. The Greek lady instantly understood and echoed back the same. And Emily did not stop there. "Enas tzatziki, enas cola zero, enas freschi apostropha, sas parakalu." The lady understood perfectly and wrote it all down. "Nice accent, Emily," said Mr. Christakis, the teacher who himself was half Greek. So this was praise indeed. Heidi was astonished with her friend's fluency. "How did you learn to speak Greek?" she asked, flabbergasted. Emily explained. "When my dad agreed to pay for the trip, he said the deal was I had to do some online Greek lessons." "And you learned to speak Greek so fast?" "Well, only the most important things, like food. At least I'm not going to starve," said Emily. But of course the ancient Greek scholars were in no danger of starving either, because the waiters all spoke English. As she was speaking, a burly waiter used a net to fish a wriggling trout out of a stone pool under the waterfall, which was now thrashing around in a plastic bucket. A girl called Flora, who happened to be a vegetarian, was sitting close. Seeing this, and near to tears, she exploded. "That is nothing short of barbaric!" and stomped off in dismay to the further end of the table. Soon, a waiter brought a collection of starters called mezes that the kids could all share. Each little dish was more delicious than the next. This is good," said a boy called Oliver, reaching over for some more spinach and feta pastries. "Yes, and perhaps you can stop scoffing down the whole lot. You're meant to share, you gluttonous hog," cried Emily, who was unfortunate enough to be sitting next to the greediest boy in their group. She had already watched him devour a whole basket of bread and endured his loud belches. It was made worse by some of the others laughing hysterically at Oliver's noisy eruptions. "You're so rude, Oliver! Just stop it, for goodness sake!" By this point, Emily and Oliver had both taken hold of a generous plate of tzatziki. As you can imagine, the tug of war inevitably ended up with a creamy mixture of Greek yogurt and cucumber flying out of their hands and landing on the stone ground. "What a mess! Will you stop that?" shrieked Heidi. Mr. Christakis looked up from his plate. "Heidi, keep your voice down. I've been saving myself all day for this," he said, looking down at his dish with a smile. "Sorry, Mr. C," said Heidi, who actually did not feel sorry at all. After all, it was not her who had been misbehaving. It was her friends. After lunch, the minivan took them on a short trip up a windy road to their lodgings. Mr. Christakis had booked an old villa which was situated in a picturesque and traditional Cretan village. It had a lovely garden, a swimming pool, and magnificent views of the steep mountainside. The 4 girls on the trip shared a stone arch-shaped room that had probably served as a grain store in previous times. Heidi lay down on her bed, took out her phone and plugged in her earphones. She opened up YouTube and typed "Modern Greek Lessons." She was determined to catch up with Emily's useful language skills. Kalimera, Kalimera, she repeated several times back at the video of the Greek speaker on her phone, before practicing Bouini, which means "where is?" Meanwhile, Emily relaxed outside on a sun lounger and read her novel until she became bored. She decided to go for a venture around the cute garden filled with an array of colourful flowers. She was admiring the huge Cretan pots delicately arranged with aromatic herbs, such as thyme and basil, before she discovered a gate hidden around the back. Mr. Christakis had told them not to leave the villa, but she was curious to explore the little streets and did not intend to go far. In fact, she went no more than about 100 metres between the stone-walled houses before she found something interesting. It was a mosaic floor that was protected by a fence. It had an attractive geometric pattern and looked old. A little notice said it dated back to the Roman period in the 2nd century AD. She snapped a picture or two and headed back to the villa. On the way, she took a few moments to pick a tempting pomegranate from a tree overhanging the street. In the evening, Mr. Christakis gave them a little talk about where they had come to and the plans for the trip. When he'd finished speaking, Emily put up her hand and said, "Oh, by the way, Mr. C, did you know that there is an ancient mosaic near here? It dates from Roman times, and it's only about 100 metres from the villa." "No, I did not know that. How did you hear?" "Oh, well, I was speaking to the owner of the villa," said Emily, telling a white lie. "Marvellous. Well, let's go take a look," said their teacher eagerly. "It's through the gate at the back of the villa. You turn left and walk down the little street past the pomegranate tree," said Emily. The pomegranate was sitting on a plate in front of Emily, but the teacher didn't notice the clue that Emily had been out of the villa and picked it. So Mr. Christakis took the kids on the short expedition to inspect the mosaic. "That's odd. I've been here many times and I did not know about it. Good find, Emily," he said. Emily smiled. She was pleased because she wanted to feel that she deserved to be on the trip. She wasn't in the ancient Greek class like the others, but she was justifying her place on the trip. But Heidi thought of all the hours that she had spent learning ancient Greek verbs, nouns and adjectives, with all their many different endings that changed constantly. And here was her friend lapping up all the approval of her teacher. It didn't feel very fair at all. That evening, when Mr. Christakis fetched pizzas and Greek salad from the village taverna, Heidi didn't feel hungry enough to eat more than one small piece. Her stomach did not feel at all right, as if butterflies were fluttering about. And when she looked at Emily, who was happily praising the pizza and bragging that it was just as good as the one she ate in Rome, Heidi felt even worse. She peeled a piece of ham off the top of the slice of pizza and secretly fed it to the little one-eyed cat that was meowing at the foot of the chair. The next morning they were back in the minivan to head off for the archaeological dig. Mr. Christakis explained that they were driving a few kilometres further up the mountain to a large construction plot. Some wealthy Germans had bought it 6 years ago for their luxury villa, but the Greek Department of Archaeology had forbidden them to start building. First, experts had to dig up the land to check there were no ancient ruins or artefacts. After many delays, the dig was in progress. A university friend of Mr. Christakis was in charge, and he had given his permission for the class to take part in the excavation for 1 day. The minibus took the party of kids high up into the mountain along a winding road. Up, and round they went. The journey along the precipice of the mountainside seemed endless, and potentially treacherous. Heidi and a few others were starting to become quite alarmed. The tarmac just stopped, and then it was a steep drop to the bottom of the valley. The wheels of the minibus were tracing this sharp edge. All their lives depended on the steady driving skills of their ancient Greek teacher. Some of the kids on board were praying with bated breath that they would not dive over. On one sharp bend, they almost ran into a herd of goats clanking their bells. Emily was sitting at the front of the minibus, admiring the views, the sheer mountainsides. Finally, they arrived safely at their destination, and Heidi released a huge sigh of relief. The rich Germans had chosen an idyllic spot to build their luxury villa. They were on a plateau with magnificent views over the valley. For now, there was no building on the land, just digging. The archaeologists had excavated about a third of the plot, down to about 1/2 metre. The friend of Mr. Christakis welcomed the kids, and they showed them what they had to do. First of all, they needed to be wearing hats and sunscreen and have plenty of water to hand. Then they must go down on their hands and knees and not so much dig through the dirt as comb through it looking for ancient artefacts. "Have you found anything yet?" asked Mr. Christakis. "Just a few bones and an old frying pan," said the archaeologist, "but I have a hunch that a beautiful spot like this would have been the perfect site for a shrine or an altar to the gods." The kids were soon working down in the trench, and Mr. Christakis was walking around making sure that nobody was rushing and that everyone was taking care not to miss any special finds. And that was the first part of Envy. What do you think? Can you sympathise with Heidi for feeling just a little bit envious of her best friend? Do you think they can remain friends? Listen to the second and final episode to find out. And thank you again to Yulia and her family in Romania. If anyone would like to support us, perhaps the easiest way is via PayPal. Look for details on storynori.com in the sidebar. Hello, this is Jana, and I'm here with the second part of our story, Envy, set on the island of Crete. And this story is dedicated to Zoe and Cyrus. In the first part, best friends Emily and Heidi set out on a school trip to Crete. Heidi is studying ancient Greek at school, and her friend Emily, well, she's just going along for the trip. But somehow, it is Emily, not Heidi, who gets all the praise from their teacher for knowing all about Greek mythology and even some modern Greek words. And Heidi, well, she's feeling just a little bit envious. When we left them in the first episode, they were about to take part in an archaeological dig on the site where some rich people wanted to build a villa. Heidi turned up a few stones, and Graham found the skull of a sheep. When everyone was feeling hot and tired, and Heidi was complaining that her back hurt, Emily called out, "Oh, Mr. C, come and look! I think I've found something!" The teacher was the most excited the kids had ever seen him. "Go carefully, Emily," he said. "Take your time." She carefully brushed the dust off the shard of pottery. "Good," encouraged Mr. Christakis. "Yes, well done, Emily. That looks really interesting," said Heidi, who was feeling more envious than ever. How come her friend had all the luck? It was quite a large piece of pot, with a geometric pattern on it. The chief archaeologist put on his glasses and examined it carefully.
"Well, it's interesting, but I can't say for sure if it's important,"
he said.
"Tell you what, we'll send it to the museum in Heraklion for further examination."
"Do you think it's valuable?" asked Heidi.
"If it's valuable, it's bad news, I'm afraid, well, for the owners of the land." We'll have to dig even deeper to look for more.
And Heidi thought, but it's only ever good news for Emily. The next day they got up early for a longer trip to the ancient ruins of the Palace of Knossos. Mr. Christakis explained that Knossos is by far the largest and most spectacular ancient site on the island of Crete. In the year 1900, it looked like the site where they had been digging the day before. But the British archaeologist Sir Arthur Evans kept on digging and discovered a Minoan palace, which they were now going to explore. But first, would anyone like to tell us the legend of Knossos? Asked Mr. Christakis. Oh yes, said Emily. There was a labyrinth here when the ancient bull monster, the Minotaur, lived. He was killed by Prince Theseus with the help of Princess Ariadne, who gave him a ball of golden thread. Very good, Emily, said Mr. Christakis. Yes, Emily, you really know your mythology, said Heidi. Oh, I learnt it all from the novels I read, said Emily. For Heidi, the feelings in her stomach only got worse when they visited the museum that afternoon. It was full of wonderful things, like pots decorated with swirling octopus legs, frescoes of dolphins, and acrobats jumping over bulls. Heidi loved looking at all these wonderful objects that had come down to us from a joyous ancient civilization. But the most special part was when they had the privilege of visiting the experts who worked behind the scenes. Emily presented the piece of pot that she had found on the dig, and the museum's archaeologist held it in his hands and examined the pattern on it. It's probably from the late classical period, perhaps 400 BC, he said. I will consult with my colleagues and I'll let you know what they think in a day or so. But thank you, Emily, for bringing this find to our attention. It's not every day a foreign school student brings in an archaeological artefact. Good job, Emily, said Mr. Christakis. Emily could not hide her delight at the praise and beamed a smile from ear to ear. Heidi tried to smile, but found it difficult. She knew it was wrong to feel envious of her best friend. She should be happy for her. But deep down inside, she really wished that Emily had not come on the trip. She felt confused. Was she a bad person to feel this way? Normally she could talk to Emily about anything that was bothering her. But this time, Emily was the last person she could talk to. Oh, how she would have loved to catch the plane home right now. And she didn't care if the takeoff was scary, or even if there was bumpy turbulence all the way back to Gatwick. It was early evening when they returned to the stone villa. Mr. Christakis went into the village to order pizza for supper, and Emily went with him to help carry the boxes back. For some reason, that was the last straw for Heidi. Now she felt angry. She went out into the garden and said aloud to nobody, So Emily is the teacher's pet now? And she's not even in the Greek class? Heidi wanted to get away from everyone, so she went to the back of the garden and out through the gate. She wandered aimlessly along the cobbled street to the Roman mosaic that Emily had found. There she ran her eyes over the notice board that explained all the points of interest nearby. A little map indicated there was a cave above the village. Legend held that one of the muses of the arts was born there. It had also been used as a hideaway by resistance fighters and bandits in various parts of Crete's history, right up until the Second World War. I like the sound of that, thought Heidi. I'll go and find it, and then perhaps Mr. Christakis will notice me and realise that I can show some initiative too. So Heidi walked through the village in search of the path that led up to the cave. She saw an old man sitting outside his house drinking a tiny cup of coffee. Excuse me, sir, she said. Where is the cave? The man smiled, revealing a gold tooth. He clearly did not speak English. Thought Heidi. Here's an opportunity to practice my modern Greek. She had been learning tourist phrases such as, where is the hotel? And where is the police station? And where is the toilet? But so far her video lessons had not given her the word for a cave. But then again, maybe it was one of those words that was the same or similar in ancient and modern Greek. She gave it a go. Pou ini hospios? She asked. For a moment, the man looked blank, but then he comprehended. Spilia, he said. Perhaps he was used to people asking this question, but at any rate, he understood. He stood up from his stool and led her 50 metres along the road to the start of a path, and sure enough, there was a sign in English and Greek pointing to the cave. Heidi wished him well. Yassas, she smiled, and headed up the path. It was steep and stony, but Heidi's step was almost as springy as a goat. All the same, she wished that she had brought a bottle of water, as she was feeling thirsty. After 15 minutes of climbing, she was rewarded by finding a fresh spring where she could drink and wash her face. Then around the next corner, she found the entrance to the cave and a little Greek Orthodox chapel made out of whitewashed stone. She tried the door to the chapel and it was locked. So instead, she ventured inside the cave using her phone as a torch. At first the cave seemed quite small, but then it widened out. She found herself walking among pointy stalagmites and stalactites that looked like teeth. It was as if she was inside the mouth of a minotaur himself, but she was too mesmerized to be afraid. She felt the thrill of discovery. Of course, many people had been here before, but she was the first from her class to visit the cave. Not even Mr. Christakis had mentioned it. Yes, she, Heidi, had found the birthplace of one of the ancient muses. This was where it happened, and its subsequent history had been exciting too. Bandits and rebels had hidden out here. What a shame I can't share this secret with anyone, she grumbled. If I tell Mr. C, he'll probably give me detention for a week for leaving the villa. The only time he notices me is to tell me off. In fact, the best thing I can do is just stay here. He won't even realise that I've gone. I'll spend the night here and then go down for breakfast. That's what I'll do, yes. It will be a test. If he doesn't realise that I'm not there, that will prove he's a bad teacher. And it's not my fault he's biased against me. So Heidi lay down in the mouth of the cave. She was so wrapped up in her feelings and thoughts that she forgot to turn the torch off on her phone, and soon the battery was dead. Meanwhile, the rest of the kids were eating pizza under the veranda of the villa. Emily was looking around anxiously for her friend. She did not like to point out that Heidi was not there in case it got her friend into trouble. But as soon as dinner was over, she went back to their room expecting to find Heidi lying on the bed. She had noticed that Heidi was quieter than usual, but had not spoken to her about it. She felt uneasy, as if there was some unspoken tension between them. She couldn't imagine anything she may have done wrong, but it couldn't have been serious. Surely it was just a mood, just a little rough patch between best friends. She decided it was better to say nothing and wait for it to pass. But of course Heidi wasn't in the girls' bedroom, nor was she hanging out with the boys in the other room, and she could not find her in the garden either. In fact, none of the other kids had seen Heidi for at least an hour, perhaps more. Oh dear, thought Emily, wringing her hands. What must I do? It was time to tell Mr. Christakis. She knocked on his door and explained that she couldn't find Heidi. Wasn't she at supper? He asked. No, she wasn't, said Emily. I thought that perhaps she wasn't feeling well and that she was in our room, but after supper I couldn't find her there either. I have asked around and no one else had seen her. You are a good friend to Heidi. We must find her quickly. I'll look around in the garden and talk to the owner of the villa. She can't be far away. But after inquiring and searching for an hour, Heidi was nowhere to be found. The sky was already getting dark when they went down to the village, but none of the cafe or shop owners had seen her. There was no room for doubt. Heidi was missing, and the sky was now black. Oh dear, said Mr. Christakis. Only he did not quite say that. He used a word that teachers aren't supposed to use. Then he said something in Greek that Emily could not understand. "Are you going to call the police?" asked Emily. "No, not yet," said Mr. Christakis. "All Hades will break loose if we do that. First I'm going to speak to the village priest. He will know what to do, and if he doesn't, he can at least pray for us." Meanwhile, Heidi half opened her eyes and looked at the moonlight that was shining on the wall of the cave. The shadows of a tree seemed to form the shape of a dog. "Oh, that's Shumpy," she thought, thinking of her little dog at home. She recalled how Emily had been terrified of her dog when she first got him, and how hard she had worked to overcome her fear for the sake of their friendship. "Emily's my best friend," she thought. "She will notice I'm not there, and I don't want to worry her. I'd better go back before they call for a search party." Meanwhile, Mr. Christakis hurried to the church in the square, hoping to catch the priest before he went home for the night. Thankfully, he found him just as he was leaving and quickly explained the emergency. The priest invited Mr. Christakis into his office and gave him some spiritual help, known locally as Raki, as well as some practical assistance. He used his phone to gather a group of 10 friends, and they went around the village, knocking on doors and asking if anyone had seen an English schoolgirl. Eventually they found the man who directed Heidi to a path that led to the cave. While all this was happening, Heidi was descending down the path, but as her phone had died, the only light she had came from the full moon. She did not get very far before her sandal stubbed a stone, causing her to stumble and fall. Ow! Her ankle hurt! Now she could only limp down the path, and her vision was even worse because her eyes were wet with drowned, hoping to find a clue that Heidi had been this way, when to his amazement, the spotlight fell on the girl herself, sitting on a rock. "Am I dreaming?" he thought. Before he could say anything, Heidi called out, "Mr. C, please don't be cross. I didn't mean to get lost." And Mr. Christakis replied, "Heidi, of course. Don't worry about a thing. I'm just relieved to have found you. You gave us quite a scare." They helped steady Heidi as she hobbled down the mountainside. Of course, she was incredibly happy to be rescued, but at the same time, she was feeling embarrassed. What would she tell Emily and the other kids? Why had she run off like that? Mr. Christakis seemed to read her thoughts. "Everyone will be very interested to hear about your adventures in the morning," he said cheerfully. "Did you phone my mum and dad?" she asked anxiously. "Nope," said Mr. Christakis. "Couldn't get a signal." "Oh, wow, at least that's one good thing," said Heidi, relieved. Mr. Christakis was almost right. The kids were incredibly excited to hear all about Heidi's adventure. But they weren't waiting for the morning to ask her loads of questions. As soon as she arrived at the villa, Emily gave her a huge hug, and they all sat around Heidi, curious about what had gone on. "You're a real explorer," said Emily. "I would have been too afraid to go on my own up the mountain." "Too sensible, you mean?" said Heidi. "Well, you're safe and sound, thank goodness," said Emily. "Yes, I'm really glad Mr. Christakis found me. He's a really good teacher." The rest of the trip was more relaxing. They spent a few days by the beach, because who can visit Crete and not enjoy the beautiful sea and the sound of the waves? Mr. Christakis received a call from the museum. "Oh, it's bad news," he said. "For the Germans who want to build the villa, at least. The pot that Emily found is even older than we thought. It dates from the Minoan period. Basically, it means that is an important archaeological site, and there are probably many more interesting things to find there. They'll be digging for at least another 2 years." "Oh, Emily, you are a real archaeologist," exclaimed Heidi. And this time, the praise for her friend was heartfelt. And that was Envy, written by me, Jana, and Bertie for Story Nori. We do hope that you enjoyed the adventures of Emily and Heidi. And I'd like to give a shout out to two of our listeners, Cyrus and his sister Zoe. And hello to their mum Sarah too. Cyrus sent us a story about Felix, an old man who finds a magic ring. Felix wishes for a castle and wealth, inviting the poor to live there and eat all they like. However, an evil wizard, disguised as a beggar, tries to steal the ring. Felix, in the nick of time, wishes for the wizard to lose his power. Thank you, Cyrus, for showing us how to use good fortune for good deeds. His sister Zoe has been busy writing too. She sent us a story featuring Katie the witch, her best friend Isis, and a new girl at school called Laura. Their friend Paul arrives too, via some transportation magic. As it happens, Laura has a little magic in her too, and uses it to help fix things around her grandpa's house. Only she doesn't tell him. Thank you, Zoe, for writing a story that is true to the spirit and characters of Katie the Witch. If anyone would like to support Story Nori, perhaps the easiest way is via PayPal. There's a link on the front page of our website. You can also write nice comments about us in Apple Podcasts or other apps. And by the way, you can subscribe to our audio on YouTube now. From me, Jana, at storynori.com. Bye for now!